Okay, you're going to see that I've been churning out quite a few of these crazy ideas, and they're all pretty terrible. But yesterday was an interesting one, so the recording I made yesterday, pretty much all of the things I recorded yesterday were also written yesterday. And then everything I'm about to read now was also written yesterday. Oh, it's just a little fucking thumb machine, just thumbing out, thumbing things from the thumbs. Okay, I'm really quite disappointed with this intro. Very disappointed indeed. Anyway, I'm just going to get through them because there's a lot of them. I'm becoming a rather big fan of Eric Weinstein. Despite his commitment Despite his commitment to non-total detachment from religion. In fact, I'm yet to find any part of his religious affiliation I have real trouble with, which cannot be said for Peterson. Although I'm starting to come around on Peterson a bit. You know, I'm starting to forgive him for his sins. I think he sees religion as possessing... this is Eric. I think he sees religion as possessing some instructions for traversing things which he doesn't understand in a way that at the very least doesn't retreat from optimality. So obviously I'm saying religion doesn't provide an optimal solution to these problems, and I think he realises that, but it provides a solution. Well, provides guidance where maybe he thinks there isn't other guidance available. Anyway. He doesn't seem to make any outrageous assumptions about the nature of reality or the legitimacy of unsupported truth claims found in Scripture. Why am I so bad at reading? What the fuck? Good God. Or the legitimacy of unsupported truth claims found in Scripture. He seems to believe there is some utility in outsourcing some aspects of behaviour to rules and instructions, but also seems fully capable and, more importantly, willing to separate the wheat from the bullshit. I also wonder... Have I stolen that from someone else? That little... Changing the phrase from chaff to bullshit, I don't know. I also wonder whether anyone else recognised the very slight similarity between his dynamic with his brother Brett and that found between Mycroft and Sherlock Holmes. Obviously, they occupy different fields than the fictional characters, but their characters and relative demeanours seem to at least resemble them in part. Also noticing the differences in the brothers' chosen style appearances and attire. You see, Eric kind of wears suits and stuff like Mycroft might, and he's obviously part of a big company and all that. And then Brett's wears kind of more trendy stuff, and a bit like, sure. Oh, never mind. It's just a stupid little thing to say, really. Obviously, I'm not supporting the reverse of the argument. I just like pointing out incoherent arguments wherever they arise. And in the Brett and Eric Weinstein Rubin Report episode, which, despite my undecidedness over Dave Rubin as a person, is perhaps one of my favourite intellectual YouTube videos. Oh, God. Intellectual. What a fucking gay word. You see, now, because I just said that I'm not sure about Rubin, I've just used the word gay derogatorily. Maybe it suggests that I don't like Rubin because he's gay. But that's not the case. It's not the case at all. And I think, actually, in that episode, I say it in a minute, but that episode actually made me like David Rubin a bit more. Anyway, no, I haven't used the word gay as a derogatory term for a long old time there. I don't think it's... I think it's just because of the social pressure. I don't think it's because I have any real issue with using the word. Anyway, Brett says the best argument against the existence of a creator is the number of stars in the universe. That the number of stars in the universe is so outrageously large that it is surplus to the requirements of us and would be completely unfathomably unnecessary for a creator to do such a thing. That it can't be so because, in part, and this was in response to a facetious interjection by Eric, the night sky is the result of an imperceivably small fraction of this number. That the vast majority are redundant. The vast majority of the stars are redundant because. You're just running to Eric at that point, so you can't really take that bit as seriously. Anyway, but the flaw here is that the very fact that he knows this to be the number of stars and is commenting on it, and that the information is available to him, is evidence for their non-redundancy, or rather, non-total redundancy. Wow, using a lot of hyphens today. Still got a lot to go. A lot of terrible shit. I'm separating the wheat from the bullshit here by reading all the bullshit. And then everything that I don't say can be wheat. Ha ha. Let's just hope you're not gluten intolerant. Ho ho ho. Hoo hoo hoo. God, I hate myself. I've been trying for a long time now to implement Sam's no tolerance. Have I done this? Have I done this already? I don't know. I've been trying for a long time now to implement Sam's no tolerance policy to lying, and would say I've probably adhered to it around 97% of the time, and perhaps this is more insightful. This is more insightful around 70% of the time, during which I would have previously lied carefree. I was and have always been a chronic liar. In many ways, my default response is to lie. I find it easier to have a coherent and engaging conversation when everything I am discussing is fictional. Well, not everything, but when about 80% of what I talk about is just made up on the spot. Is fictional and being developed in the moment. And something that I'm currently considering is whether the often abused argument of the only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, and whether in fact this does have some truth, not in the case of guns, but when guns are replaced with lies. Similarly, I think many of the funniest jokes rely on explicitly lying, but the understanding is that a greater truth is being recognised and referenced. However, there are few things more dangerous than a bad person believing they are doing a good, believing they are a good person telling a bad, evil/harmful lie, even if they believe they're doing it for a good reason. And given the potential for anyone to be unknowingly deluded in this way, perhaps it is statistically safer to never lie, because if you were lying for evil, you might not know it. Something I forgot to mention in my rebuttal of Jordan Peterson's misrepresentation of self-interest theory is that he fails to recognise or acknowledge in this case that the psychopathic approach is not sustainable, so too the drug addict's approach. In fact, the version that I would advocate and that would be sustainable would very likely be incredibly similar to whatever he thinks makes life meaningful. So yeah, it's kind of, people just equate self-interest theory with hedonism, which it probably kind of is to some extent, but then I guess they're misrepresenting hedonism, or at least what I would consider. I guess there are many hedonists who probably just are trying to get as much pleasure, so you're snorting cocaine and having sex with as many prostitutes as possible, or whatever like that. But I'm talking about a kind of more sustainable, long-term, taking into account all the possible experiences, including things like giving money to charity or whatever, or helping others and all that shit that, I'm just, oh God, I can't bother to go through it again. I've done it all a million times before. A million times. One of the hardest questions for me at the moment is one that Peterson tackled. See, going quite Peterson heavy I was yesterday. Quite Peterson heavy. I usually kind of refrain from watching any of the clickbaity title videos, but I just allow myself to, and you can see it develop here, what happens. One of the hardest questions for me at the moment is one that Peterson tackled in another of his videos I came across recently. The problem of mate selection being explicit discrimination, and how is this fair? He claims that we have a sort of non-contractual agreement that you can say no to me if I can say no to you, which effectively equates to you're free to reject me so long as I'm free to reject you. Which seems great until you realise there are some people who are rejected by all and some who can be rejected by none. So too to the idea of climbing dominance hierarchies. I believe it is almost certainly true that female mate selection pays close attention to the male dominance hierarchies, which rely on self-structuring and selection by the males to promote the best males to the top by mostly subliminal assessment and presentation. How obvious can it be that the selection criteria lean heavily towards genetically determined characteristics? What of the life of the genetically inferior? Maybe the system has operations in place to make the roles of the occupants of the lower sections of the hierarchy worth occupying. I'm not sure it does. Suicide seems too common for that. Maybe suicide is a momentary glitch in the system. I'm not sure how the numbers of suicide have changed over the years. This would all be fine were it not for consciousness. It isn't nice to be suicidal. And of course you can believe that the dominance hierarchy selects for less genotypic and more supposedly admirable, oh my God, I'm such a fucking moron, and more supposedly admirable qualities like goodness or kindness or whatever. But these are things which we are reliant on here we go. Let's go back again. And of course you can believe that the dominance hierarchy selects for less genotypic and more supposedly admirable qualities like goodness or kindness or whatever, but these are things which we are reliant on our development to develop. I consider myself a relatively decent person, but I was never molested as a child, and someone may well be an even more admirable person than I, and decent I should have said there, I guess, and have been molested as a child, but they might never have been repeatedly tortured by a mentally unstable parent, and so on. I'm not saying that I have, I'm just saying that you can keep piling on extra levels of torture to a person's existence until they eventually break. Right, and it's hard to blame them for that. The novel I proposed to be accompanied by a non-fiction book was set out to be a demonstration of resilience in the face of every kind of adversity piled cumulatively on one poor individual, and was in fact, and this name is coming up rather regularly in these past few notes, inspired by Jordan Peterson's claim that the story of Christ is the ultimate tragedy. He claims that it can go no further, citing things like betrayal of his friends and so on. But it wasn't that bad for Christ. For starters, he was the Son of God with magical powers. He was never raped or molested as a child. He had a grand following. He died, but then he came back to life anyway. He didn't have a brain tumour causing him to act abnormally impulsive and aggressive. He was clearly intelligent for the time. I believe he was depicted as physically attractive, revered, respected, and renowned. I can think of many real contemporary lives far more tragic. Related to my somewhat newfound affiliation with the integrated information theory of consciousness, I think memory plays a much more pivotal role in the philosophical and experiential understandings of consciousness. Sam Harris has claimed that taking LSD and other experience-altering drugs allowed him to realise that different conscious experiences were possible under the right circumstances. But without memory, even the most basic conception of consciousness begins to deteriorate rapidly. Suppose Sam had taken this drug, and had experienced this altered state of consciousness, but once the trip ended, all memory of it faded. Not faded, but just disappeared. Unless he had in some way described his experience in the moment. To a witness, he would have no way of knowing that he had experienced consciousness in a way unusual to him. Bright of the fact. In fact, without a record of his experience, the period during which he was on the drug would, after the fact, appear to him to have been a period of unconsciousness, akin to being under general anaesthetic. It might be worth noting that the fact that no one can recollect... Oh God, I'm such an idiot! That no one can recollect whether they were conscious under such anaesthetic is not proof that they, in fact, weren't. A far better indicator would likely be neuronal activity. But if you extend this hypothetical memory cessation to all moments, consciousness as a concept begins to deteriorate also. Yeah, just trying to imagine consciousness without memory. Pretty crazy little thing. I mean, people talk about living in the moment all the time, but if you really had no concept of time or anything like that, it would be quite absurd. I'm setting myself quite a substantial reading list, consisting of many books I would not have expected myself to read, but that is the precise reason, or at least one of the reasons, I intend to read them. The Bible, the Quran, whatever Buddhism book there is, Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, all made it onto the list, although I don't think I would ever have objected to reading Dostoevsky for a reason. It's just a shame that I am such a slow reader, and will be especially so of reading styles I find nearly incomprehensible, like those of the Bible and thus Nietzsche, by nature of his inspiration, and similarly Shakespeare, although I have no intention of reading his work anytime soon, because I really do, perhaps by dint of my stupidity, find his work incomprehensible. I think I'd probably better read the old Bible and the Quran and maybe some of the other ones if I'm going to be so critical of them. But, well, maybe because it would help me be critical of them. But and also I'd quite like to see what, now that I'm hating Jordan Peterson less. Well, I think Sam is pretty much spot on about him. 90% of what he says is great, and then 10% is actual bullshit. Dangerous bullshit. But yeah, the 90% seems like it. He does owe quite a bit of it to his what should you call it? Devotion to the Christian faith for whatever reason. So I think I'm gonna just kind of try and see where he went wrong. And, well, I think I'm kind of buying into his dominance hierarchies ideas a bit more. I don't think they're really his ideas, I doubt that, but he's quite, what's the word? A strong advocate, I guess, that's not the word I wanted anyway, of Jung's archetypes stuff. And for some reason people seem to reckon that the Christ archetype is the absolute best one. So I just want to see how good it is, really. I'm not sure I buy into it being the absolute best one. I just don't see how it could be. Maybe it is. Maybe it really is. Maybe that's why it's so successful. But I'm not sure. And I think there are some pretty strong similarities between the different religious, supposed archetypes, which is quite interesting. But yeah. I'm not sure the depression epidemic isn't related to our excessive alcohol consumption. See, now I'm sorry, I comment on this in a moment, but I'm starting to pose sentences in a way that similar to Jordan does, which I don't really like, because they're so ambiguous. They say as little as they possibly can. And maybe it's better to be ambiguous because you don't know what you're saying, but at the same time, you'd like a bit of conviction. My problems with attractiveness, zing, go deeper than physical appearance. I don't like that I favour intelligent people so much, because intelligence has such a strong genetic component also. Some people like to believe that intelligence can be developed manually, but I think there is fairly damning evidence that no amount of effort can match true inherited genius, coupled with the necessary circumstances of childhood. And this analysis might imply that I value the quality of applying oneself to self-improvement, but the person who lacks the compulsion to undertake such a task does not choose to be so. I suppose the reality of the utility of these value systems, which in my case seems to favour intelligence and diligence over or conscientiousness, which is Jordan Peterson's favourite word. It's not his favourite word, it's probably something like fucking Pinocchio, or dragon, or snake, or something like that. And I don't deny that they're pretty. It's interesting that they're common themes throughout so much mythology. But I wonder. Okay, I might make myself sound like a real retard here, but see, I've used gay and retard as derogatory terms today, which I haven't done for a very long time. Anyway, I'm not sure they should have such thing, much like the N-word. I'm not sure any word should have such power to offend. I don't think the solution is to say don't use them, because then you give them more power to offend. So that if anyone does have to use them, you're pretty much powerless to combat it. Anyway. Where was I? I suppose the reality of the utility of these value systems, which in my case seem to affect... Oh yeah, sorry, I was just about to say, the thing that might make me an idiot. The whole snake thing. I think the snake thing is pretty interesting, how it's... obviously it's just a byproduct of them being one of our major adversaries, I guess, during evolutionary development. And also the similarities between us and mice and rats is pretty interesting, and how they have similar responses to snakes, I reckon. It's not that I reckon, but But I think the issue I was talking about was how close our common ancestor with mice is. It might be a long bloody time. Well, it is a bloody long time ago, but it might be. Never mind. It's not. I'm just saying snakes. Snakes, all right. Snakes used to kill us, and they used to kill mice, and they used to kill the thing that made us and mice, probably. But I wonder how snakes must have evolved a bit at least. No? I wonder what snakes used to be like. Bigger, maybe? I suppose the reality of the utility of these value systems, which in my case seem to favour intelligence and diligence or conscientiousness, is that we want to encourage these traits and thus bolster their evolutionary resilience. It's more a matter of which characteristics could you not stand to be out-competed to extinction. This was more ideas for my little terrible book that I'm never going to write, because it's terrible, and it would actually... I can imagine how it would be received, just because I was thinking about including... Basically, one of the first major events would be the most horrific event for some people, for most people, to even read about, and some people who have actually experienced it would probably find it traumatic to read it. Anyway, protagonist experiences the worst possible thing that creates the greatest possible suffering at each moment of its life. Molested as a child and is made to believe that they deserved it, forms only one meaningful relationship with a parent figure, probably the mother, only to have them die, but not until they have watched them devolve and have been tortured by a monstrous version of them, perhaps due to something like early onset dementia, and only when they're old enough to have formed this relationship and really experience the torment of such a metamorphosis. And then I tried to write a little few sentences. So this was just following his dramatic molestation. See, and also I think you put yourself pretty up for you make an effigy of yourself kind of as soon as you write about something like this, and people believe that you have repressed desires for it, I suppose, or actually I think it would be more likely that people would instantly assume that I was writing about myself and I'd had these experiences. But it would be so hard for me to then say, no, I really haven't, but also, and then as soon as you say that, then they're like, well, how dare you write about it? Anyway, if you're trying to, I don't know, never mind. Lil Eckert. Here was Thursday, and still little Eckert had not returned. Oh, I was thinking about maybe that was nowhere to be seen. The place where he used to be was where I now stood. I felt sorry for taking his place, but hated him for sentencing me to his destiny. I was no fool, and could see that the plotted course was not a pleasant one. I mean, it's bad enough writing about such terrible things, but do you have to be such a terrible writer too? His existence feels terrible. It is true suffering. But every good deed is accompanied with a sensation, and he didn't feel this is a quote, and he didn't feel terrible. After he does something, that sentence comes back. He begins to seek out these experiences of not feeling terrible, like the most feeble hedonist, but can only achieve them through variations of altruism. The respite from his suffering is a reward for bringing respite to others' sufferings. Maybe it should just be suffering. Anyway, I think the unique utility of fiction novels is that they allow, or force, depending on your perspective, people to think, whereas non-fiction, although of course still outrageously useful, show people how others have thought, and in an abstract sense tell them what to think. Fiction gives far more freedom in how to think, and perhaps in some cases what to think also. What if some suicides are the result of a sort of higher order natural selection, sort of pseudo-mimetic value analysis, which via the means of social signaling influences, which via the means of social signaling influences, not which genes do make it, what the fuck? Okay, which via the means of social signaling influences, which genes do make it into the oh, for fuck's sake. Okay, I've got it. Jesus Christ. What if some suicides are the result of a sort of higher order natural selection, sort of pseudo-mimetic value analysis, which via the means of social signaling influences, not which via the I should just put a fucking comma there, it would have made sense. Which via the means of social signaling influences not which genes do make it into the next generations, but those which don't. At a point when society transcends the ability for competitors to simply annihilate their opponents, more manipulative ways must be introduced to apply the same selection pressures, which result in evolutionary progression. I am an actual moron at reading. I really am. I'm slow when I do it to myself, but at least I don't fucking stumble over the words in my head. And it's not just reading, actually, it's talking. I have my mouth. I actually thought about this. I came up with, it's not a very original sentence, but my brain writes checks that my mouth can't cash. There you go. Which result in evolutionary progression. So when people become sufficiently unwanted by society, their existence subconsciously becomes so intolerable they find any means to terminate it. Of course, my desire to kill myself did not coincide with this at all. I believe I was very much wanted as a part of society, and only when I became suicidal would this have changed at all. But then again, I never did end up killing myself, so perhaps I never was the victim of such subliminal pressures. I finally managed to watch Sam Harris's appearance on Star Talk, which, at least from what I saw, seemed to be a pretty horrendous show. Well, I missed the last 5 minutes. Maybe in the last 5 minutes they redeemed the entire thing, because it was, you have to be in America, I guess, to watch it and have some kind of American TV provider, and I didn't, and I had to watch some guy uploaded it on Reddit, but he did a terrible job and it missed the last 5 minutes and it kept running out full screen. And also in his bookmark bar he had things like altright.com, which really gets on my nerves. But anyway, yeah, it's interesting to know that you're kind of in the same media circle as people that you disagree with so strongly. Well, I guess I don't know how much I disagree with. I just know that there's at least some stigma towards them, and also I think Ben Shapiro is a pretty strong alt-right. Well, I don't think he definitely doesn't consider himself alt-right, but I think the alt-right has a much stronger affiliation with him than they do with Sam Harris. Anyway, there's some overlap is what I'm getting at. The underlying structure of which of the show seems to be to use the intellect of Neil deGrasse Tyson, whom I respect as a physicist, less so as a philosopher and freethinker, in part for his delayed understanding of the situation of artificial intelligence, to perform a reasonable interview with a fellow intellectual. They get him to perform a reasonable interview with a fellow intellectual, and then take snippets of that interview to be defiled by two positive morons without any chance of actual reason to be interjected by the interviewee. The part that got to me, although really none of it actually got to me. I've not escaped anhedonia that much yet. But when Sam used the case of was it Walt Whitman? I couldn't remember if it was Walt Whitman. I think that might be some other person. But anyway, Charles Whitman, maybe, something like that. I don't know. The gentleman with the tumour that impacted his brain in such a way as to cause him to become a murderer. And when Neil posed the implications of such a scenario to the neurotheologian, which is on the surface a pretty amusing title, if someone committed some number of murders but were found to have some kind of tumour that was proven to be the direct cause of their actions, and had this tumour removed, and once it had been removed, would never behave in this way again, would and should they be convicted as if they had willingly, in quotation marks because free will, committed those murders? And the guy laughingly said that they would, and said it was because they had committed the murders, completely missing the point that for all intents, literally, and purposes, he is not the same person. It would be almost synonymous to the murderer dying, and the prosecution saying, then we have to find someone who looks like them to serve the sentence. But his response was made even more sickening by his assertion, accompanied by the same naive laughter, that he had sat on those cases, on similar cases, and that was the very decision that came to. It was the kind of laughter of someone who is pushed on the subject. It was the kind of laughter of someone who, if pushed on the subject, would be confused and would say, "But they told me it was the right thing." I wouldn't even understand. Well, not like that. But they told me it was. How would he say it? It's going to be more like, "But they told me it was the right thing," or something. He just wouldn't. Anyway, engage. Anyway, and wouldn't even understand the concept of having had the opportunity of applying critical thinking. He just seemed. His laughter. He didn't grasp the situation that he was in as he was answering the question. It was just like he was kind of under trial himself, but I don't know. I can't remember what to say. Other qualities that I believe I value more highly in a partner are humour. In fact, that's one of the highest ones. But there's something else that I don't quite have one word for, and it was one of the identifying qualities, and the only woman I think I've ever truly loved. Well, not truly loved, but woman I've loved the most. And it was this sense that she, and it requires me to indulge a rather narcissistic view of myself. But I imagine, I think pretty much this is a kind of common theme in like teenage romance. It kind of helps bolster the sense of it's you and me against the world, baby, that kind of thing. Anyway, but she, like me, was capable of seeing the game that everybody else is playing, and despite taking part in it to varying degrees, recognise it and mock it. Spock it. God. And that is a quality that I really would hate to see eradicated from the world, so long as I occupy it. Also, the people playing the game don't generally know they're playing the game, or at least how much they're playing it. They're usually too engulfed by it. But I think all people kind of do recognise it to some extent. But I think some people are less willing to mock it because they fear that mocking it will mean that they can't reap the benefits of it. And I quite like it when someone says, kind of fuck it. And, well, I mean, even saying that is part of the game, really. The whole thing's a game. Anyway, I realise I'm constructing my sentences rather like Jordan Peterson now, and much like I noticed with any homogeneous media I consume in bulk in a short period of time, am beginning to think in the voice, mannerisms, and thought processes of the media itself. In this case, it's Jordan. Many times before has it been Sam Harris. I remember the Walking Dead had me thinking in a country accent. Rick and Morty had me thinking in cartoons. I try to adopt the form of the ideas I am exposed to. Also, when I make very close friends with someone, our minds begin to converge very rapidly in many ways, mostly thanks to the involuntary contribution on my part. Right, that was a 30-minute one. Jesus Christ, I'm not going to be able to send that over email. Fucking brilliant. All recorded in one day. This plus yesterday's one. That's 42 minutes worth of stuff. God, crazy, insane person.